Hello, class. Mr. DeVoe-Peterson here. Let's take a look at chapter one in your ebook. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up a PowerPoint that I am going to run now and just run through a kind of a condensed version. The author gives you a PowerPoint for this chapter, but I wanted to go through it and kind of just do a high-level overview. And the book, chapter one, opens up with the definition of what kind of evidence did you recover? Was it inculpatory? Was it incriminating that would have the suspect guilty? Or was it exculpatory evidence and that it showed that the person being investigated was innocent? So that's the key concept in keeping an objective, open mind when you're analyzing the evidence. Really important to do that. Um, when we're looking at the definition of what we do with the field of digital forensics, there's many different procedures and processes that have to take place. That the description of this field has changed over time, but it really has to do with the application of computer science and investigative procedures for, in this case, legal purposes for analyzing digital evidence. And what's key here is that proper search authorities taking place. That is, was a search warrant obtained before searching, or was there a company violation that took place that prompted the investigation? And then when the evidence was collected, was chain of custody observed and documented from where you pick up the evidence until it gets into the forensics lab? Were mathematical validation hash algorithms used to make sure that the copy you made of the evidence is the same as the original? Because you always work on a copy. What kind of validation tools were used? Were they current? Were multiple validation tools used to verify that the evidence collected was the same with different tools? Could you repeat that validation technique with the forensic software and get the same result? And then we end up with reporting, because you have to document what you do, and then possibly expert presentation. When we look at the field of computer forensics, it's really all encompassing. And the book introduces a three-part triad, a team of efforts that take place to protect the system. One is vulnerability and threat assessment. And that is, what is the integrity of the standalone workstations and the network servers? Are they patched? Are they up to date? So that's key. And it may be a team of people that have that responsibility, or it may be the same person or team that does all three of these steps here. The other is network intrusion and detection. And that has to do with automated tools to monitor the network and firewall logs and alert the IT staff if there's a problem that they've detected. And finally, we get into a lot of what this book kind of covers, and that's digital investigations, and that's forensics analysis of the systems and collecting evidence related to some kind of incident or crime that's taken place. Okay, so let's go through and describe the difference between types of investigations. One is public sector, dealing with government agencies and involves search warrants and possibly criminal investigations. And then we have private sector that has to do with private companies. And most often it involves with a company violation of some sort, right? It could be email harassment or embezzlement or sabotage or any number of things. So, and based on the type of investigation, the different things you have to that has to occur before the investigation begins, like a search warrant for public sector and some kind of violation for private sector. It's important, and I brought this up early, you could have evidence that shows the suspect is innocent or guilty. So it's important to keep an open mind about the evidence and the analysis until everything's completed and done, that you've gathered all the evidence, you analyzed and exhausted all leads, you looked at all available facts before coming to a conclusion. And then confidentiality has to do with only sharing the information of the investigation with the people that really need to know. With the company, many times, and even public sector, it involves attorneys and a team that looks at the evidence. So it's really important for your credibility that you keep the results of an ongoing investigation confidential. Okay, so now we're getting into the steps of what do we do to actually analyze evidence. And initially, you need to make an assessment of what kind of analysis has to take place, and then from that, a detailed checklist of all the steps involved in analyzing the data. And some of the live labs you're going to do walk you through some of this, where you see the details and what you're supposed to do to gather the evidence and then analyze it after that. So it's important to see, once you get the checklist, you'll know what resources are needed to complete that investigation. And it's real critical that you never work on the original copy, original drive, flash drive, hard drive, SSD drive that you collected. You work on a copy of that evidence. Because if you were to damage it in the process of analyzing it, well, you've just lost your evidence, right? That would be very bad. So always work on a copy. And then we go through and we analyze evidence, and we view the information and see what we discovered from it, and we do the report. And oftentimes, really early on, we critique the process we went through to look at the evidence. All right, so what are some of the procedures in doing a private sector investigation? And then the book gives you a couple of examples, and I'll go through the internet abuse one. So what would be involved is you're going to have to collect the suspect's computer and get their IP address. And then you'll need to get the internet proxy logs from the IT department, where all the computers go through from within the organization to the internet. And then you'll do a digital forensics analysis with software, comparing the URLs, the addresses that the suspect has gone through on their own personal or work assigned computer, and compare that to the proxy logs and see, is there a connection between that shows that the suspect is really the one that went through and went to maybe a website they shouldn't have gone to, or were involved in doing a personal business at work, or sharing information they shouldn't have within the organization, right? So those are things you're looking for in the comparison. Okay, so when you look at equipment that's needed for doing a forensics analysis, it deals with the forensics workstation, a computer, or if it's on site, it could be a laptop. And typically, those workstations have more drive bays and more connections on the motherboard to connect a variety of different hard drives to that workstation to analyze it, right? And then you'll need software, and the software varies based if you're looking at a Mac system or a Windows system or a Linux system or perhaps a mainframe, and getting or extracting data from the cloud. So the software is designed for the different types of systems, and offers different file formats, proprietary formats and generic formats, where you can use the data collected and analyze it with more than one type of forensic software program. So hardware and software is needed for forensics. Now let's say you're conducting an investigation. So the chapter wraps up with this. And so as we said earlier, you'll create a plan, kind of a rough outline, and then a detailed punch list of the steps that have to be followed. You'll set up your forensics workstation, perhaps loading additional software on it if it's needed. You'll install that software. You'll gather the digital evidence, and always you'll make a copy of that and work on the copy of the evidence. So you always want to preserve the original evidence. That's really key. You analyze the evidence, you get the results, you write up a report on it and critique it, and possibly there'll be some presentation made in a court after that. So that's pretty much it. I hope you find that helpful. Let me stop the sharing the screen. Be sure and send me an email or get a hold of me if you have any questions. And I think that's it. All right. Good luck, everybody.